All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is 3:35. We're starting just a few minutes late. We're going to give folks until 3:40 to get settled into today's LEAP meeting. I'm Kristen Neville. I'm the director of the Mendocino County Cannabis Program. With us today, we've got Paula Groves, who is our contract administrator, Nina Holloway, who's the staff member here at the department, and the master of all streaming, meeting facilitation, and website updates. So with that said, let's give folks a few minutes, as I mentioned, to get into today's meeting. We'll start in just about 4 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and mute my microphone, and I will be back with the group, as I mentioned, in just a few minutes. All right, let's go ahead and get ourselves started. Thanks everyone for joining. It's the October LEAP program meeting today. I'm Kristen Neville. I'm the director of the County of Mendocino's Cannabis Department. And with us today for the meeting, we've got Paula Groves, who is with Elevate Impact, our contract administrator for the program, and Nina Holloway, who, as I mentioned, is the master of all streaming and meeting updates. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's see here. All right. Our agenda, we'll talk about sources of funding, program statistics, program updates, and we'll spend some time with questions and answers. And so just to get everyone orientated with how to participate in today's meeting, you can type in a question or a comment by using the Q&A feature, which you'll find in your toolbar. If you're on the Zoom app, that is. And so on the Zoom app, that Q&A feature is either at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, and it looks like a little chat box. And underneath the chat box, it says Q&A. If you click the Q&A feature, you'll end up with a chat box where you can type in your question. Those questions come to just the panelists, and then the panelists can either answer the questions live or type the answer to the question. If we type the answer to the question and submit it, all viewers or all attendees have access to see the question and the answer in the Q&A feature. And I just want to acknowledge and make a note, we've had lots of folks ask for us to completely open the Q&A feature, but we have concerns that doing so would turn it into a chat, because basically attendees would be able to chat back and forth, which means it would be really incredibly painful and challenging for the panelists to figure out what questions are actually being asked, because it's really not a functional dialogue box. You can't use it as both dialogue amongst attendees and a Q&A feature. So we're going to leave it closed the way it is, and that is the reason why, because we think there's a lot of value in having it be just a Q&A feature. We will make time today for oral questions and comments. If you'd like to get into the queue to ask a question or make a comment towards the end of the meeting, please do raise your hand. The raise hand feature is in the same toolbar as the Q&A feature if you're on the Zoom app. If you're not on the Zoom app, you may raise your hand using *9 on your phone. And so that is how you would want to manage that. And when we get to oral comments and oral questions, we'll acknowledge folks based on raised hands. And when it's your turn to speak, we'll let you know that you can go ahead and unmute your device. And to unmute your device, you can use the mute and unmute microphone feature in the bottom left-hand corner of the toolbar if you're on the Zoom app. Or if you're calling in today, you can mute and unmute using *9 or *6. I apologize, *6 on your phone. Moving on. Paula, do you want to do a few slides, and then do you mind? And then I'll jump in when it gets into the detailed budget slides. And you're muted, just so you know. You're still muted.
Sorry, thank you.
Now we gotcha.
I am here. So in terms of the LEAP funding, round one funding was an award of $2.245 million. It was to be distributed between May 15th of 2020. And the deadline for disbursement was August 31 of 2022. As you'll see on the next slide, we were able to meet that deadline. Round two funding, we were awarded $832,000 with a disbursement time period between April 15th of 2021 through October 31 of 2022. We'll show you an update of those balances as well. And then round three funding has an award of $2.944 million with a disbursement time period from May 9th of 2022 through May 9th of 2023. And that's the disbursement cycle that we're in right now today. Next slide. So in terms of current funding rounds and allocations, the purpose of the first grant round was for direct grants and workforce development. Round one funds were $1 million. Round two funds were $565,000. Round three, $1.9 million for a combined funding amount of $3.56 million. In terms of fee waivers, state licensing / permit fees and direct grants, round one funds were $700,000. Round two, $100,000, round three, $633,000 for a combined funding amount of $1.433 million. Technical assistance training, which is basically technical assistance training to equity applicants regarding licensing and operating in the cannabis industry. Round one funds were $224,000, round two, $83,000, round three, $294,000 for a combined funding amount of $602,000. Finally, administrative services, county staff and consultants. Round one funds were $224,000, round two funds $83,000, round three funds $115,000 for a combined funding amount of $423,000. Next slide.
And one note I want to make here before we go on to the next slide is round one and round two technical assistance funds were put into the direct grant pool. So they ended up being awarded to applicants through the direct grant program. So what we have available currently for technical assistance is just over $294,000.
In terms of LEAP statistics to date, LEAP funding and spend down update, LEAP grant program funding round 1, 2, and 3, we've been allocated $5.3 million. To date, we've awarded fee waivers totaling $541,000. Direct grantees award total $1.893 million. Contract administrator totals $294,000. Then we have a part-time development analyst through May of 2021 who was paid $13,000. So the total spent through October 19th of 2022 is $2,742,000. The amount of funding that we have left from round 1 is 0. We have dispersed all of that funding. The amount of money left in round 2 funds is 0. So we have dispersed all that money. So now we are currently working to disperse round 3 funds of $2.562 million. I always find this slide quite interesting. In case you're wondering what types of projects are being funded and where the money is going, water system upgrades received $80,000. Water storage upgrades received $188,000. Solar projects that reduce the use of internal combustion engines helping to improve air quality received $300,000. Lake or streambed alteration fees received $43,000. CEQA compliance, environmental cleanup, and remediation projects received $151,000. Road repair and culvert installation resulting in reduced watercourse sedimentation received $31,000. Rent agreements and leases for third parties received $95,000. Facility improvements and ADA compliance upgrades received $77,000. Supplies ranging from electrical wire to soil and amendments received $116,000. Insurance and surety bonds received $76,000. Fixtures and equipment received $252,000. Brand recognition and marketing services received $34,000. Bookkeeping and CPA received $38,000. State licensing fees received $93,000. And then finally, cannabis testing received $1,100.
And just for clarity's sake, if you add these numbers up, they will not add up to what we have on the previous slides about that reflect what we've awarded in direct grants so far. These numbers are a couple months old, but I think still very useful to help folks understand what has been funded, what types of projects have been funded, and at what rate of funding. So we'll try to get this updated a little more for the next month's presentation. Let's see. You want to continue, Paula?
Sure, no problem. LEAP waiver statistics. So in terms of the types of fee waivers that have been awarded fee waivers, the waiver type range from the Department of Agriculture, Planning and Building Services, TTC, MDC, round 1 and 2 funding, and then obviously we give you the subtotals. So looking at, I won't read every number on this slide, but I think it's important to note that the Department of Agriculture received approximately 60 to 70 fee waivers. Planning and Building Services received close to 300 in fee waivers. TTC
Well, wait a minute. Let's back up here. So we're looking at these columns here. Whoops, sorry.
Oh, we're not adding them all together?
We're not adding them all.
I'm sorry.
This is the sum down here. My apologies. So
that's okay.
I'll hand it back to you.
Let me back that up.
I already totaled the far right columns.
Got it. All right. So the Department of Agriculture received 22 fee waivers. Planning and Building Services received 131 fee waivers. The Tax Department received 213 fee waivers. MCD received 57 fee waivers. And so total fee waivers across all different departments equals 423 fee waivers for an amount of $541,000. In terms of LEAP eligibility, to date, I'm just going to go to the grand total number. We have certified 206 people as eligible, and we've received 283 applications. So there's approximately 75 folks who are still in underwriting in terms of LEAP eligibility. In terms of the next grant round, people have been asking about when they can apply for the subsequent $30,000. That will open on November 1st of 2022, and applications will close on January 7th of 2023. And again, you can receive a follow-on grant amount of $30,000 or for a total grant amount of $50,000. And the funding can also be used for the income tax program.
So how about I take this one on?
Okay.
Okay. So we do need to do an update to the LEAP program manual to reflect direct grants for income tax relief. They will be available for applications starting November 1st. So we've got our work cut out for us over the next couple of weeks. So direct grants for income tax purposes are going to work very differently. They are going to be awarded in the same grant agreement as your other items, but the funds will be set aside and the funds will be paid out what we would say is in arrears. So what you'll want to do is tally up your grant amount. So if you're applying for a second grant in that November 1st timeline, right, to January 7th timeline, and you have a first grant, you can take the total of that $50,000 plus whatever you're applying for or being awarded in a second grant. And out of those combined totals, if you are receiving your grant award check or checks as a business entity, you may set aside up to 3.8% of the grant award amounts for the purposes of income tax relief. And if you are receiving your grant award check or checks as an individual, you can set aside up to 13% of your award amounts for your income tax purposes. The process will be that once you are approved for income tax relief, you will have to then prepare your taxes in the spring and then pay your taxes and then bring the receipt for the payment of taxes or submit the receipt for the payment of taxes. And we will be able to provide you the money you set aside in arrears. And if it's not the total amount that you set aside in arrears, no problem. You'll only receive the portion that was due for tax purposes. But you may not exceed these percentages for income tax purposes. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions on this, but we're going to defer all questions to the end of the meeting.
Kristen?
Yes.
One final point on that slide. If your tax bill is less than the amount set aside for taxes, what happens to the delta?
Well, then you would still be eligible for additional grants.
Apply that against a different.
You would have to apply again.
Okay.
So, yeah. Fee waivers. Let's just talk a little bit about how to access and utilize fee waivers. So LEAP fee waivers are all available on the Mendocino Cannabis Department's website. You want to go to the forms and resources page, which is hot linked in the presentation and previous presentations. So you can find those on the 2022 event page, or simply if you can get to the Cannabis Department page, you'll be able to just click through to forms and resources, scroll down to about the middle of the page, and you'll see the link or the icon to click into forms and resources. There are on that page, treasurer, tax collector, tax waiver form. There is a Mendocino Cannabis Department fee waiver form. There is a planning and building services estimate of fees form. And there's a Department of Agriculture scale registration waiver form. So for all of these forms, right, you can only submit a waiver form when the fee or the tax is due. So you can't submit, say, planning and building services fee forms, estimate fee forms, unless you have the building or the project is ready to pull the building permit or the demolition permit or whatever the permit may be. And so you can only use one you can only put one fee or one tax on each form. So you want one form per fee or tax that you are interested in waiving. And the max amount that each eligible applicant can waive, right, or use in the waiver program is $30,000 per eligibility applicant. TTC tax collector tax waiver forms can be used for a multitude of items. They can be used for 2022 quarterly filings. So if you want to use a waiver form for your quarterly filing, you will go to the Treasurer Tax Collector's office. You will complete your quarterly filing over there. They will provide you with a document showing the amount that that quarterly filing has due to it, to the TTC for, and then you bring that document from TTC to the cannabis department, or you email it to the cannabis department with your completed waiver form, and we can then go ahead and pay your quarterly tax amount. Please do include your LEAP eligibility certification letter, especially if you are emailing your materials to us. Very important. You can also pay delinquent taxes utilizing the tax waiver form. In order to do that, the LEAP eligible applicant must pay 100% of interest and penalties associated with those delinquent taxes. We cannot waive any of the interest or the penalties. We can only waive the tax dollar amount. So you'll first go to the Treasurer Tax Collector's office. You'll pay all interest and penalties to the Treasurer Tax Collector's office. And then the Treasurer Tax Collector will provide you with a receipt showing that you paid all interest and penalties and that only the tax dollar amount is due. That tax dollar amount that's due after the payment of interest and penalties is what can be waived. So you'll put that dollar amount on your completed tax waiver form. You'll couple it with your LEAP eligibility certification letter, and you'll either bring that to our counter here at the MCD, or you can email that to us at cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org. With all of these waivers, if you're emailing them, please do CC Paula at elevateimpactmendo.com. McD Fee Waivers, again, on the website in the LEAP waiver form section on the forms and resources page. All of the fees, the McD fees that are eligible to be waived are listed on that form. You're going to use one form for each fee, and you're only going to submit a fee waiver form at the time that the fee is due. And so please, you'll fill out the form, you'll sign it, you'll check the box for your renewal fee, you'll submit that form completed with your LEAP eligibility certification letter to cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org, CC Paula at elevateimpactmendo.com, or you can bring it to our counter Monday through Friday during counter hours. Planning and building services, this is a little different process, right? And it's not instantaneous. So I know folks sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, my building permits are going to expire and I need to, reinstate them, and, or they already expired, or, so know that this process does take a little longer than the other waivers because there's some back and forth that's occurring between the department and the TTC. I'm sorry, PBS. My apologies. I read a tax question at the same time. So you'll open up the Planning and Building Services estimate form, and you'll fill out one form for each building permit or each building permit reinstatement or each demolition permit, right? One form for each permit you are seeking a LEAP waiver for. You're going to submit the completed estimate of fees form to the email address found on the form. So this form first goes to Planning and Building Services. They need to provide the MCD with the proper dollar amount that we need to transfer to them to cover your building permit. So these forms, instead of coming to the MCD, go directly to Planning and Building Services. You can email them, you can drop them at the counter for PBS. PBS will then provide the staff over here at MCD with the completed and approved estimate form. And then our staff can go ahead and process the waiver. And what I mean by processing the waiver is we take in that information, we log the information in our database. We then provide a transfer for that amount to Planning and Building Services. Planning and Building Services, when they get that dollar amount from MCD staff, they go ahead and they go in and they pay your fee, right, in their electronic system, which is what produces the fee paid receipt. And then they will send you the fee, they will send you the receipt for paying the fee directly. So you're going to start this process in Planning and Building Services, and they're going to be the ones to complete it by sending you the receipt. We just do the work in between here in the department. There are other agency fees that you can use fee waivers for. We mentioned cannabis department fees and Planning and Building Services fees. But should you have a Department of Environmental Health fee because you have to put in a septic system for your ADA restroom, right? Or they need to come out and, I don't know, inspect or do a review of some structure or some waste system you have in place, you can contact the MCD and we can work with you to establish a waiver. We have not had requests for DEH, Department of Environmental Health waivers, but it doesn't mean they aren't available. So if this comes up for you and you would like to waive your well permit for your cannabis irrigation or the installation, the permit for your commercial septic for your employees, please let us know. We can help work through that system with you from here at the Cannabis Department. Now, there's a couple things that are not eligible for fee waivers. We are not allowing waivers to be used for Class K residential building permits. You can use fee waivers, say, for grading permits, but they have to be related to cannabis, to your cannabis project. You can't receive a waiver for a grading permit that has nothing to do with your cannabis project, as an example. Additionally, state agency fees such as Department of Cannabis Control, Department of Fish and Wildlife, State Water Resource Control Board, et cetera, cannot be waived, right? The waiver system, think of it as an internal county agency to county agency transfer system, right? However, these state fees from Department of Cannabis Control, State Water Resource Control Board, Department of Fish and Wildlife, those fees can be built into your direct grant application and you can receive funding to pay those fees, but you have to include it in your direct grant application. So just want to be clear, we're more than happy to help fund those aspects of your operation, but it has to be through the direct grant. We can only waive internally county agency to county agency. Direct grant program. You want to talk about this a little bit, Paula, and then kick it back to me when you're ready?
Sure. So in order to get your budget approved, you need to make sure you're submitting the following 3 sets of documents. 1, there's an Excel spreadsheet that you need to fill out. Each line item on the Excel spreadsheet needs to be explained on the scope of project. So if you're putting water tanks as item 1 on your Excel spreadsheet, then item 1 on your scope of project needs to say water tanks. The cost, call it $5,000. The number $5,000 will be on the Excel spreadsheet. And then on your scope of project, which is a Word document or a qualitative document, will have $5,000 in parentheses. And then it'll say, covers the cost for purchase and installation of whatever type of water tank it is. And then you need to submit an estimate or a quote for the water tank from wherever you're buying it from, Tank Depot. So the Excel spreadsheet will say water tanks 5,000. Scope of project will say water tanks 5,000. It'll explain what the water tanks will be used from. And then estimate number 1 will be from Tank Depot with the grand total of 5,000 on the invoice. And you need to do, so the spreadsheet needs to match the Word document, which needs to match the invoice. When all of those numbers line up, hopefully your grand total will be $50,000. We have templates for all of this. We have examples for all of this. And if you need this information, please send an email to either me, Paula at Elevate Impact Mendo, or Stacy at Elevate Impact Mendo to get a copy of the templates. Thank you.
And then I just want to say a few more things about this, because I think there's a lot of questions about how to move some types of projects forward, right? So with capital improvement projects, you really want to include all of the costs and expenses associated with picking up that project from where you're starting it, right? You may have already started it, but from the starting point that you're presenting in the scope of project, you want to describe it from that point all the way through to completion. And you want to include the cost from where we're starting with the grant agreement or the grant application all the way through to completion. And this is really important because we need to help do our best due diligence in a manner that ensures that we are awarding funding for projects that will be completed. Additionally, if you are proposing grant funding for lake or streambed alteration agreement projects, please, in your scope of project, use the same language that is at least the same project title as what shows in your lake or streambed alteration agreement list of projects. So we are matching the scope of project around lake or streambed alteration agreements with the projects that are listed in the lake or streambed alteration agreement itself. And if you have, say, large culvert projects and your invoice is calling for 3 sections of 24 diameter culvert, each at 20 feet long, and you have 11 culvert segments for 9 projects, right? We really need you to help us understand how these, additional sets of culverts or pieces of culvert are going to be used for those 9 projects. If it's not described in the scope of project clearly to let us understand how 11 segments of culvert, for example, are going to be utilized for 9 projects, I'm going to kick it back to Paula. Paula's going to come back to you and ask you to really make this clear, right? So you might have project 1 that is using 3 segments of culvert. You would want to describe that in your scope of project about your lake or streambed alteration agreement, okay? Additionally, we are verifying that the project, such as ADA bathroom installation, has a commercial structure associated with it, right? So if you're doing upgrades or finishing work on a building so you can complete your commercial processing area, for example, please provide us the building permit number. If we don't have it and we can't find it, right, and it takes us a heck of a lot of time to search through all of our records to try to match things up and align it, we're going to kick it back to Paula. Paula's going to come back to you and ask for the additional information. So I just really want to encourage folks to be very crystal clear in their explanations in that scope of project. The more information you can provide us showing us this building permit is going to have this work done and it's going to cost us this much and this is why we're doing it, the more descriptive narrative you can provide us, the easier it is for us to move that grant application forward and award it. So please save yourself some trouble and just be as descriptive as you can. For solar projects, we want to understand the amount of power you're using. So if you're using generators, which not everybody is, and you don't need to be transitioning off a generator to qualify for solar or other renewable opportunities, but if you are transitioning off a generator, We want to know how often you're using that generator, how much power you're using from that generator, and how much power the solar system is going to provide you and how it's going to eliminate or at least reduce your use and reliance on that generator. We are not funding internal combustion generators, period. Okay, so that's off the table. But please do, if you are asking for renewable resource installation, we are requiring that you explain in your project scope, in your scope of project, roughly how much power your business utilizes and how that installation of renewable resources is going to meet your business's needs. Okay. I think I can leave that there, but I just wanted to get a little more description in there so we can hopefully have less rewrite time for folks.
Right. And Kristen, while we're going over specific budget items, can you just share a little bit more about the issue of self-dealing? Because that's been coming up quite a bit in a number of different circumstances. So if you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So we're seeing self-dealing in kind of two types of projects. It's coming up around leases and rents, right? And it's also coming up kind of around who works for who in capital improvement projects. So in leases and rents, the state has guidance that actually restricts self-dealing in grant programs. And this is what we're working with currently. So if I own the property and I own the business who has the license on the property. So Kristen owns her property and she's got Kristen's Most Amazing Cannabis business, and that's my farm name. And I want to lease my property. I want Kristen's Finest Cannabis to lease, the property from Kristen Nevedal. That's going to be self-dealing. That's me taking grant money to into my business to let my business pay me. It's still me to me paying me, right? The same is true if my husband owns the property. So say my husband owns the property, but I have the application under Kristen's, Amazing Cannabis. I cannot pay my husband, right? So you need to have a separation between, think, third-party independence, right? So if I rent from Paula, right? I'm not married to Paula. She's not my sister. She's, we don't have a kinship. We aren't related. And we aren't domestic partners. So she's third-party independent from my personal finances and my business. So she could be the landlord and I could take LEAP equity money and I could pay her as my landlord because she's a third-party independent person. The same is true for contracting. So if myself and my husband or my domestic partner, right, owned a contracting service and I applied for LEAP grant funds to install solar and to do culvert work on my property, and I was going to use my husband, domestic partner, significant others, contracting service, that would constitute self-dealing. I would need to use a third-party independent contracting service to conduct the work. And this is based on state guidance, and it's based on state guidance that's not specific to the equity grant. It's based on state guidance that the state has used with other grant programs, including their small business grant programs. Think I should say anything else on that right now, Paula?
No, I think that, there's nuances, like if you are separated from, but not divorced, it's still considered self-dealing.
Yeah.
If you are paying a business that is called, a third party name, like, I don't know, Tank Depot. But if it turns out that you are an owner of Tank Depot, even if it's only 5% ownership of Tank Depot, you cannot pay Tank Depot. You cannot buy equipment from Tank Depot with grant funds. So we're looking at business ownership as well as kinship and paying yourself. Those are the three categories where self-dealing has come up and has presented a problem in the budget approval process. That's all I would add.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right, timelines. Timelines are timelines that are realistic in an ideal world, right? And they don't take into consideration a lot of the back and forth that we often have with applicants. So generally, and it really depends on how complete your budget and your scope of project is, you can expect 4 to 6 weeks of working with the Elevate Impact team in what we call the underwriting phase. So you work with the Elevate Impact team to get your materials dialed, you go through the underwriting phase, and then they actually bring that scope of project budget and all of your invoices or receipts, whatever, you've got your estimates, to the cannabis department. And we do a weekly, oftentimes twice a week meeting where we review the budgets and the scope of project that the Elevate Impact team brings forward. And frankly, when they bring those pieces forward, they're really feeling like they're done, right? And that they have a high likelihood of being approved by the department. So again, sometimes we get into these materials in that meeting. And I'm like, I don't have a building permit for this processing facility that they want money for, or, I don't have I can't understand how these projects align with the Lakers Stream Bed Alteration Agreement. So in an ideal world where there's not a bunch of back and forth, me asking Paula to get more information where she has to come back to the applicant, it's generally 3 to 4 weeks in that approval process because they're tidying up materials and they're scheduling you into one of these meetings. So just because you complete underwriting in a Monday does not mean you're going to get into that week's batch of approvals for the meeting, right? So it really does take some time and some scheduling to get from the completed underwriting and into an approval meeting. Once the agreement has been approved, right? Elevate Impact is like, woohoo, agreement approved. And then they go through and they actually craft the agreement. So they make sure that we have the proper W-9 for your person or your business entity, depending on how you want to receive that check. That is going to determine how the grant agreement is crafted. They put the scope of project and the approved budget into the grant agreement with all of the attachments, and they send that back over to us where our staff reviews those materials, uploads it into Cobblestone, and starts the vendor account development process with the auditor's office. And so that process of getting the vendor account number so we can get you into Cobblestone, we can run you through Cobblestone, is 3 to 4 weeks. And sometimes this is extended because while this program has been awarding for a few months now, right, there's sometimes things that county council picks up on that the department or the Elevate team does not pick up on, and additional questions may come up while you are moving through the Cobblestone process. So 3 to 4 weeks in the Cobblestone and contract processing is what you can expect if there's no additional questions that come up from any of the 11 departments or divisions in the county that also review your grant agreement materials. Once we've made it all the way through Cobblestone and all of the other divisions and departments and so forth and so on have signed off on your grant agreement, we will send you a DocuSign and ask you, the awardee, to also sign that agreement. Now, DocuSign works really great. It keeps folks from having to drive in here to sign their agreement. It does spam for some people. So, we do send an email to you from MCD or from Cannabis Program and let you know there's a DocuSign, but you may have to actually go look in your spam folder once you get that email from us if you can't find the DocuSign. Once everything is signed, you can expect another 3 to 4 weeks for us to work with the auditor's office to actually process the check. And so while this all seems like really long timelines, after you sign your agreement, it actually goes back into Cobblestone with everyone's signatures on it, mine, yours, and all of the different divisions and departments that have signed off on that grant agreement. and it has to go back into Cobblestone. It's directed to the auditor's office. So she's got an electronic copy of that grant agreement with everyone's signatures on it and an ID number so that when we send her the request to cut the check, she can match our request with what is in Cobblestone. Okay, so it does take a little bit of time because everything's got to line up just right. And then the auditor's office process check batches generally every 7 to 10 days. So this is the process. You can have your check mailed to you, which is what will happen if you don't request the ability to pick it up at the department. Okay, so if you don't want it mailed to you, you need to request to have it picked up at the department. And then only you, the awardee, are eligible to pick that check up. Okay, so this is the processing timeline. If all goes well, it is quite a lengthy timeline of 13 to 18 weeks. But again, this does not include consideration of back and forth and gathering more information, right? This is assuming, you know, a mostly complete scope and budget is turned into the Elevate team, and then it comes to us, and then there's not a lot of back and forth between us and Elevate and the awardee, right? It assumes that county council doesn't have a red flag on anything that goes into Cobblestone, or that risk doesn't, for example. So, you know, this is in an ideal world. Now, anything else about this timeline, Paula?
No, I can't think of anything. That was great.
Okay, great. So, short presentation today. We've got about 40 minutes for questions. I have 3 hands raised, one from Lauren Mendelson, one from Paul Hansberry, and one from Hannah Nelson. And I'm going to ask all of you who have your hands raised to just bear with us for a little while longer. We're going to go through some of the questions that are in the chat feature. And then we will come back to oral questions. And we are going to have to go through all the questions in the chat feature before we get to oral questions. But I do want to remind folks who would like to ask a question orally that if you are on the Zoom platform, you can raise your hand to get into the queue by clicking the raise hand feature. This looks like a little hand. If you are calling in today and would like to raise your hand to get into the oral question or comment queue, please do use *9 on your touchpad phone. That'll raise your hand for you. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start working through these questions. And there were a couple of tax questions that came up that I want to go ahead and just couple together and answer at the same time. So there was a question about whether or not LEAP funds could be used for property taxes, and the answer to that is no. Property taxes are not an eligible use for LEAP funds. And then, you know, I had a second question come in about property taxes that are related to the assessor's office reevaluating development on parcels. And so what we've seen over the last 6 months is a lot of reevaluation from the assessor's office that increases the property value based on the cannabis businesses infrastructure, such as hoop houses or farm areas or water storage, perhaps. So LEAP funds are not eligible to cover that tax associated with an increased property value that's being noted by the assessor's office. So we had those questions. We get asked those questions a lot. So thank you for asking them. But I wanted to make sure that we just got them both coupled together and we answered them out the gate. Going to budget amendments. So there is 2 different things that I want to talk about here in relationship to the budget amendment conversation, right? So I have a LEAP grant for 5 projects totaling $50,000. And one of my projects, lo and behold, is going to cost way more than I anticipated. So I'm like, gosh darn it, I really need to wrap up this expensive project that's going to cost more than I anticipated. And I want to do it with my LEAP money, but I'm not going to have enough money to do all 5 of my projects. So project 1's the most expensive. It's more than I anticipated. So I can, through the receipt reconciliation process, I can pay down or spend more money than I anticipated on project 1 and opt to not follow through with project 3 and 4, perhaps, or spend less on project 3, right? Whatever that might look like, right? That's an adjustment through the reconciliation process, right? The second question we get about budget and agreement adjustments is modifications. I was approved for 3 projects in my grant agreement. I was going to do culverts and a little bit of road work and some solar. And then I get my money and I'm like, oh my God, everything's different than what I thought it would be. I really don't want to put rock on my road right now. I want to wait. And I would rather pay for my 2 state licenses, right? That we are not allowing. So we do not have the staff to actually manage the addition of new projects to your scope of project and or your budget, right, after your award has been issued. And so the only way we would be able to do that is if we had funding from the general fund to take on an additional full-time person that was only focused on this aspect of the LEAP program. That is not available to the department. We cannot offer that service. I'm so sorry, but we are just not in a position to offer that. All right. Oh, I think we answered the question about building and planning and building waivers and quarterly taxes. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark that one answered. Yes. If your cultivation project or your nursery project or your dispensary project, whatever it might be, because this is not specific, this program is not specific to just cultivators. It's anyone who has a cannabis application or permit in the unincorporated area of the county. If your permit locally requires a use permit, you can absolutely waive that use permit by using a planning and building form, I imagine. That's a really good question of what the mechanism would be to do that. Let us know. Just send us an email to cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org and we'll figure out how to work that with planning and building services for you. But yes, if you have an AP required because you're reducing a setback, or you have a minor use permit requirement or a major use permit requirement, those are eligible fees that can be waived. Little confusion about how to go from the $50,000 grant to the $80,000 grant. If, you know, as of November 1st, we bumped up the grant award amount from $50,000, which is what we've been issuing since the start of check issuance, to $80,000 per person. So if you're in the first round of grant awardees and you only applied for, because you could only apply for $50,000 in direct grants, and you wanted to apply again for additional monies, not to exceed $80,000 combined, you can apply as of November 1st for additional monies. So as of November 1st, there's 2 things that happen. Awardees who have received $50,000 or less, right, can apply for additional funds, bringing their overall balance up to $80,000 in awards. First-time applicants can apply for up to $80,000 in grant funding. I hope that helps to clarify. Planning and building fee waivers do not come out of the grant funding. It's a different maximum amount. So think of it this way. Waiver program has a limit of $30,000 that you can spend. Direct grant program has a limit of $80,000 that you can spend. They do not take away from each other, right? So waivers, including building and planning and building permits, are part of that $30,000 waiver pool that each eligible applicant has access to. The direct grant program has a maximum of $80,000, right? They're independent of each other. Think of them that way. Mortgages are not currently covered. It would be considered self-dealing. I cannot take grant money to pay my mortgage. So currently it is not an eligible use. All right. We have just as many questions in the Q&A feature as when we started, so I think we should go to some of these raised hands. So with that said, I'm going to open up the timer. We have lots of time. We're going to leave it at 2 minutes for now. We have time to go back through. I just want to make sure we get through a combination of oral questions and comments, as well as the questions that keep populating the Q&A feature. So we'll first go to Lauren Mendelson, followed by Paul Hansberry, and then Hannah Nelson. So Lauren, you should be able to go ahead and unmute your device and start your question or your comment.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for today's presentation. Some of my questions were already answered, so I will keep it quick. It was about initial eligibility applications. Previously, not too long ago, it looked like the eligibility application was just locked and closed. It looks like it might be open again. My question is, can initial applicants submit eligibility documents at this time? That's one question. Can they submit eligibility documents? Second question is, are eligibility applications being reviewed currently? And do you anticipate that someone who hasn't yet submitted their eligibility application but has their stuff together and is fairly confident that they do qualify, if they were to submit that as soon as they can, do you think they're going to even be able to get that determination made in time to apply for this next round of grant funding? Thank you.
May I take that, Kristen?
I was going to recommend that, please.
Thank you. So yes, eligibility applications are open. There was a bit of confusion when we were trying to pause the direct grant until November 1, and eligibility got caught up in that pausing. That was a mistake on Elevate's end. So I apologize for that. But yes, you can apply for eligibility applications. Eligibility applications are open. The processing time is about 3 to 4 weeks. We've come through a significant backlog. I think we only have, I can't remember the number. It was on a previous slide that Kristen showed. But anyway, we are processing applications, and it's about a 3 to 4 week turnaround. And, you know, they are processed ongoingly alongside the grant application. So, you know, hopefully if you can get your eligibility documents into us and we can turn it around quickly, you will still be able to apply for the direct grant. If there's any holdup, if it's taking us too long, just shoot me an email and I will chase down what the problem is. Paula@elevateimpactmendo.com.
And also, you know, I think while we're aiming at spending down round 3 to meet that May deadline, right? We have a May 2023 deadline to spend down round 3, and that deadline is set by the state. We are currently preparing our next grant application. The solicitation process is open. For us, it would be a round 4 of funding for the county here. And so we will be submitting in the next few weeks for a 4th round of funding. So fingers crossed, we get a reboot on funding and we continue to award after that May 2023 timeline. So, okay. We will next go to Paul Hansberry, followed by Hannah Nelson, and then Nikki Wood. So Paul, you should be able to go ahead and unmute your device and start your question or comment.
Yeah, hi, I'm just trying to get my arms around or my head around this self-dealing aspect. I get it. If you're a company, you have your own company and you're charging yourself, that could be considered self-dealing, even though it would be an ongoing business cost. But if you have a mortgage and you've spent your entire life savings just trying to get things going, keep your head above water, and you got a home business, a mortgage is an ongoing cost, and the money isn't going to yourself, it's going to the bank. It's trying to preserve your place of business, just like paying the rent if I was renting it from someone else. The bank owns the mortgage. The property taxes, these are ongoing expenses for the property, for the parcel. There could be liens that are being put against it. Why are these not eligible if they are an ongoing expense, which is from what I understand, allowable by the state, an ongoing expense like property taxes or a mortgage? Second, and then on top of that, I'm wondering why the department and or Elevate Impact doesn't put together a list of pre-approved things. If you need to juggle your money around and you've already got a check that's cut to you, and you need to take this money and account for it, but you need to reconcile, I think is the way you're putting it, and take some money from one or some from another, and there's some things left over. There should be a pick list that's already pre-approved so that it doesn't have to go through cobblestone again. And just that would be pre-approved for eligible applicants. So at a set dollar amount or whatever it is, so as long as they're taking care of their limits. So can you comment on those, please? Thank you very much.
Sure, I will comment on those. Do a little maintenance here. Okay, so I can't answer all of your questions about why mortgages, why self-dealing is the way it is. Again, I just want to emphasize that we are following the guidance provided by the state on the self-dealing pieces. And it's, you know, I'm not an attorney and I'm not having attorney meetings with the state. And I'm also not researching the precedent and all of the reasons why the state has made the determination they have made. But I just want to be clear that we are following the guidance that County's Council has received from Go Business Council. When it comes to pre-approved items, the department has been advised by County Council that it really is not the best practice to award $100,000 worth of items and to let the awardee pick which $50,000 or $80,000 worth of items they're going to proceed with, right? Again, a lot of these agreements are capital improvement projects. We've been advised to be cautious and ensure that capital improvement projects have the ability to be fully completed and come to fruition. Those are my answers to those two pieces. We have a few more people in the queue. We're going to go to Hannah Nelson next, followed by Nikki Wood, and then Tom Perry. Hannah, you should be able to go ahead and unmute your device and start your question or your comment.
Thanks, Kristen. And I did write a question in the Q&A regarding the self-dealing and publishing the state guidelines and then any local policy. So that would be really helpful to make sure it's done. And I'm wondering if you have a policy on halting applications where there's maybe a veg mod issue or some other issue with the cultivation application. And if you notify those applicants that it's been halted and the reason for it. Also wondering if there's the money left in the award pool, let's say, that like is being set aside for taxes, or just in general, if it's gaining interest and if that money is put back into the general pool or that person's amount or whatever. I also wonder what the current staffing levels are by Elevate and any people who are directly assigned from MCD, and whether or not the county is now either through Elevate or direct MCD staff attending the monthly meetings for local jurisdictions. And then how people, and you answered this to a certain extent about how to deal with increases in estimates, and I really love the reconciliation for that. But I'm wondering also if there's some kind of additional guidance for people whose expense, like the quotes go way up. And I'm thinking of the other policy that you've expressed that says that you need to make sure you have enough funding to pay for everything, so you won't fund a project if it goes beyond the expenses of the LEAP grant, that unless the person shows how they're going to pay for it. And so just kind of this whole, how do we do this if the delays are longer than anticipated? And then aren't potential
Okay, we're gonna stop there because we got a lot of hands coming up and I've got another dozen questions. So there's a lot of questions here to work through. It's gonna take us some time. I have requested from County Council some language that we can publish reflecting the state's guidelines and the self-dealing concerns and the self-dealing criteria. I have not received that yet. As soon as we can get that information, we are more than happy to publish it. And probably it would be smart to add that right into the program manual. So we are requesting that information and hoping to get that out very soon. We have halted some applications largely because of deprioritization. So applicants and permit holders who are delinquent in taxes are not eligible for direct grant awards, right? In order to be eligible for direct grant awards, you have to have paid all of your local cannabis business taxes. You have to have what we would call an active AG number, right? And or application or permit number for the cannabis facilities business licenses. I mean, you have to be literally, I hate the term in good standing because it's so flipping confusing. But we also have some folks who we haven't awarded because we're still working through vegetation modification. And in some instances, those vegetation modification concerns associated with the applicant who's applying, we don't know the outcome of resolving those yet. So until we know the viability of that application, it's hard to prioritize providing $50,000 or $80,000 to an applicant who may not have a viable path forward. Additionally, we had an applicant recently who needs to finalize their renewal. They're asking for some infrastructure development. The infrastructure development does not match the application or the permit that we issued and what's on file. They are in the renewal process and the renewal doesn't match the site plans that were submitted for the LEAP grant. So we're like, okay, let's get this renewal shored up first so we actually know what you have going on your site. I don't understand what's outdoor. I don't understand what's a nursery. I don't understand what's mixed light at this time. So trying to award a bunch of development for that cultivation and nursery operation when we can't even determine where activities are occurring because the renewal needs to be cleaned up. Awarding the grant is cart before the horse, right? So we did go back to that individual and say, hey, listen, we would like to award you, but we really need to wrap up this renewal and modification so we actually understand what you are proposing. What is the scope of your project before we can talk about awarding you funds to bring in new greenhouses or new cargo containers. So yes, in some instances, there are hiccups that come up along the way as we're reviewing these materials. Staffing levels. I can't speak to the Elevate Impact Team staff, and I'll let Paula do that, but I will say that we do not have dedicated LEAP staff in this department. We have staff that's dedicated and supports the LEAP program, but we do not have any single individual staff person that is solely dedicated to the LEAP program. I work on the LEAP program, the chief planner works on the LEAP program, the program administrator works on the LEAP program, Nina works on the LEAP program, our department analyst works on the LEAP program. We have a couple other admins that work on the LEAP program, the front desk works on the LEAP program. But there's not any one individual whose full-time job is the LEAP program. Paula, I'll kick it to you for staffing and then I'll go back to the rest of these questions.
Yeah, our staffing levels are the same. Now that our contract has been renewed, we have access to 5 different underwriters who can help process grant and eligibility applications. So we have a deep backbench that we can draw upon to help people get through the process.
Okay, let's go back to these questions. Attending local LEAP meetings. We attend a couple different type of regular equity meetings. So there is a group of rural counties that have come together to hold regular equity meetings where we can bounce ideas off of each other. And generally, our program administrator joins those meetings. GoBiz is also having local jurisdiction meetings on a regular basis. Our program administrator also attends those meetings. Reconciliation. I'm going to unmute you for a minute, Hannah. When I find you, let me do a little search here. I'm going to unmute you really quick and let you ask this question again. And please just stick to the question about reconciliation so that we can go ahead and answer that question because I didn't get full notes on it. So please, you should be able to unmute and ask that question again about reconciliation.
Okay, yeah, and it's actually, the reconciliation was kind of part of the answer that you mentioned. So the question was about rising costs of estimates, whether it's labor or materials. And I think that part of the answer was you can use the reconciliation process to kind of spend less on a different part of your project that was approved versus not. But if you have, for example, only one project and there is this corollary policy to not fund things unless you can show all of the funding for that project, I'm just wondering how the jockeying can be done to address the fact that costs go up. And
right. Okay, so let's address that.
Thanks.
Okay, so going back to this question, like if we award Paula $50,000 for one Laker stream bed alteration, right, set of projects for her property, and she's like, holy cow, I got this $50,000. I thought it was going to cover all of my Laker stream bed alteration agreement projects, but really it's only going to cover like 3 of them. What do I do? You know, she can apply for additional funding if she's eligible. So if we awarded her $50,000, she can come back and apply for an additional $30,000 to cover that remainder. But once you hit your max on funding, there's no ability to apply for additional funding to wrap up that project. And this is why we're really looking at not having a bunch of projects that are half funded or partially funded. And why we're also asking to show proof of funds to complete a project. So I'm hoping Paula didn't, budget $50,000 for 3 culverts with estimates that said $50,000, and then all of a sudden it's $100,000, right? So if it's an additional $25,000, she can reapply and we can couple those funds to help her complete that project. And some things may also be eligible for completion funding through LJAGP. So, I think if you started transitioning to the grid and that was hugely more expensive than you ever anticipated, right? And it's what's getting you off of generators as your primary power source, and the $50,000 or even the $80,000 isn't going to cut it, you should definitely apply for LJAGP funding when that opens on January 16th to help complete that project, right? And LJAGP funds are limited in the sense that they have a limited scope of what they can be used for. But Laker stream bed alteration agreement projects, yes. Getting off of combustion engines as a primary or even a secondary power source, yes, right? So, I encourage folks to be really cautious about putting together those budgets, making sure that you have enough money to cover the cost of those projects. And if you, need to have additional considerations for labor, make sure you go to a contractor and you say, hey, can I get a bid on this? And you don't have to give us the lowest bid, you can give us the highest bid on it. So really try to do your due diligence to ensure that, you're hopefully as able as possible to complete that project. Okay. we will next go to Nikki Wood, followed by Tom Perry, and then we're going to go to some questions in the Q&A feature, unless we have additional hands raised, because we are just about out of time. So Nikki, you should be able to go ahead and unmute your device and start your question or your comment.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate this information. My question is, how would you go about requesting additional grant funding if you have not been awarded your grant fund yet, but you have been in the approval process and you're in review now? How would you go about requesting additional to that 50 to 80?
Is that your only question?
To be honest.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, and I just want to add to a little bit within that, the first application for the budget does have a balance remainder that could be seen for the next 30,000 additional requests. So it could be used for the same budget, same scope of project, just to identify what I'm trying to really ask, if that makes sense. Thank you.
I think it makes sense. So I would say, and Paula might have some additional comments here for sure. But if you have $80,000 worth of projects on your first $50,000 application, for example, you could literally turn in, I would imagine, the same budget and scope and request the additional 30 in the second grant round, right? So if you started with your $50,000 and you've already been awarded and you're like, holy cow, man, this PG&E drop is way pricier than I anticipated, you could fold all of those unanticipated expenses into a second grant application and ask for the money you need to complete that project. So those are some options. I'm going to kick it over to Paula. Paula, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think the other question you asked is, can you apply for the subsequent 30,000 while you're waiting for approval of the first 50? The answer is yes. When the applications open on November 1st, you should be able to apply for and just submit a $30,000 budget for, maybe it's new line items, something very different than what was on your original budget. But yes, you can submit a budget for 30,000 starting on November 1st. Now, if you have a budget, if your $50,000 budget is already been approved and is in the cobblestone process, I don't know if I would try to change that 50,000. You should just let that budget go through the process, but then only apply for the subsequent 30,000. If you haven't started any budget approval process on November 1st, you haven't had any budget approved, then you can apply for a full 80,000 on November 1. I hope that makes sense. 30,000 if you're already had your budget approved, 80,000 if you haven't had a budget approved yet.
Okay.
I hope I didn't confuse people.
I think it was great information. Thank you, Paula.
Sure.
We've got about 7 minutes left in today's meeting. I want to go to Mr. Tom Perry. Tom, you should be able to go ahead and unmute your device and ask your question if you would.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. The first question I have is, eligible projects, like, including them on the scope of work and the budget. I've gotten some counsel that if the total of the projects exceeds $50,000 by a good bit, and then we're going to self-fund some of them, if some of these tasks are just either completely funded or partially funded, that we should take some of them off, right? And what worries me about this is that if we don't include them on the budget at all, even if we're let's say 50% funding those, then we can't allocate funds for those tasks. The second question I have is contractors. We're getting quotes. We've gotten quotes from some contractors that are probably 3 times as much as we know we could do these things ourselves, whether they're culvert replacement or road remediation. And I'm wondering, do we need to get contractors to submit estimates for these things, or can we come up with an estimate ourselves for the labor, and then as long as we're providing receipts and 1099s, you know, can we put these through? The third question I have is about eligibility. I've had this one question come up around whether or not the applicant has a state license, and we've got a license, but sorry, I'm running out of time. First two questions will be great to get answered, please.
All right, thanks for that, Thomas. I really appreciate it. We'll keep ourselves on track here. And you can email your eligibility question if you want to. Just email it to Cannabis Program. Put attention, Kristen, in the subject, and I'll email you back so we can respond to it for you, okay? So, eligible projects. So, you know, you're right. We have asked some folks to take projects off so that other projects can be fully funded by the grant. So an example is, you know, sometimes we get these long lists, right? And it's like 12 items and none of them are fully funded by the grant, where 2 of them are and most of them are 50% funded. So what we really prefer to see is either all of the projects fully funded or the vast majority of the projects you've listed fully funded by the grant. It does make County Council a little squeamish if Paula submits a grant application and we run it through Cobblestone and she's got $100,000 worth of projects and we're only giving her $50,000 and she's got to come up with another $50,000 to complete all of those projects, right? So, you know, I know it's probably really inconvenient, but theoretically, if Paula has an extra $50K, it really shouldn't matter if we're funding 3 of her projects at $50K and she's funding the other 2 at $50K versus us funding 50% of all 5 projects, right? To her, it shouldn't really matter. The money is the money. So for the purposes of the grant application, though, we want to see that that grant money is going to complete projects for you. So it's way better to not have, you know, 5 50% funded projects on your grant budget. So I hope that that helps explain. And Paula, do you want to add to that before I go on to the next one? You're muted.
I just wanted to go back to something that you said earlier in the presentation. So if you submit a budget that has 5 items on it, and then you're out in the real world, and it turns out that the first 2 items are going to eat up the total 50,000. So the remaining 3 items would go unfunded. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's okay. So, yes. Okay. So I think I'm hoping that will help people think about what line items to put on their budget and how the reconciliation process will work.
Yeah. So a good example of what Paula's talking about is sometimes we have folks that are like, oh, it's only going to cost me, you know, $30,000 to do this solar project. So I'm going to put $10,000 of amendments on in this, and I'm going to put $10,000 of bookkeeping on this to get to a total of 50K. And then they get into their solar project and they're like, holy cow, labor and parts are through the flipping roof. Not what I anticipated. I need the entire, you know, $45,000 to complete this project that I thought was going to be 30K, which means now I only have $5,000 left. What do I spend it on? Soil and amendments? Do I put it towards accounting? That we can manage through reconciliation with you, right? And so it's really important that those capital improvements, what's really the big deal is making sure that there's enough money in that budget and or proof of funds to show the ability to complete those capital improvements. Contractors are expensive. You know, especially the farther out you are, you're not only paying for the contractor to do the labor, you're paying for travel time, you're paying for equipment hauling, you might be paying for rentals. I mean, like the farther away you get from the urban hub of Ukiah, the more dollar signs you add, the more zeros you start adding to that fee. So I understand the desire to do the work yourself. We have awarded grants for people who are doing the work themselves. But again, you cannot take grant money and then bill or use that grant money to pay yourself to do the work. So if you want to do the work yourself, that's fine. You can't pay yourself to do that work out of the grant funds. it gets into that self-dealing component that we talked about earlier. And then Thomas, go ahead, please, Paula.
So just as a point of clarification, so how you would write that on your scope of project is you would say parts are, I'm going to install water tanks. Parts are 3,900. Here is the receipt, the tank depot invoice for that. And then in the narrative, you would write, I will be doing the work myself. We are not hiring a third-party contractor. And maybe we even need to say, I will not be paying myself for this work. But I think that when they are reviewing the budgets, they want to understand who's actually doing the work. Is it a third-party contractor or are you doing the work yourself? And we need to spell that out in the budget.
Yeah, in the scope of project. And thank you so much for that, Paula. And we do have some folks who purport to have heavy equipment experience who are doing their own road work, right? And we are covering costs of renting, the machinery to help ensure that the road work can be conducted. So just an example here. So, but we are not paying them for their labor while running that equipment. So, and Thomas, please do email us your question to cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org or mendocinocounty.org. I'm so sorry. Way too much in my mind right now. So you can email us your question to cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org. If you'd be so kind, Thomas, is to put attention Kristen in the subject line, it will get to me and I can respond to you. All right, we're at 5:01. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Great meeting. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Nina. We're going to go so I can let my staff go home. So thanks, everyone. Until next month. Take care.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.